In the year 1695, right at the end of the 17th century, a Spanish monk fled barefoot and starving through the tropical forests of Central America. His name was Andres de Avendano y Loyola, and along with his men, he was dying of thirst and hunger. Their faces had been torn by thorns, and his feet cut open by pieces of flint scattering the swampy ground. Avendano and his men had been part of a mission to the city of Tayasal, an island stronghold that was the last independent holdout of a once mighty civilization, the Maya. Avendano's mission had been to convince the Mayan king of Tayasal to convert to Christianity and to accept the dominion of Spanish control, which had now spread to cover most of Central and South America. But Avendano's mission had failed. The Mayan people of Tayasal had rejected him, and now Avendano and his men fled through the jungle back to Spanish lands. Their journey was hard and treacherous. They climbed over hill after hill, through thick forest cover, desperate for food and water, their legs almost giving out from under them. But then they came over the crest of one hill and saw something that stopped them in their tracks. It was an enormous pyramid of stone, jutting out of the forest canopy, tangled with roots and vines. Although Avendano was weak from hunger and thirst, he still found strength enough to approach the ruins. There was a great variety of old buildings, and though they were very high, and my strength was little, I climbed up them, though with some trouble. They were in the form of a convent, with the small cloisters and many living rooms, all roofed over and arched like a wagon, and whitened inside with plaster. It seemed to us that these buildings must stand near a settlement, but we found ourselves, as we saw afterwards, very far from a settlement. At the time that Avendano stumbled across this ruined city, the Mayan civilization was a shadow of its former glory. The invasion of the Spanish in the 16th century had spread diseases like smallpox that harrowed the Mayan population long before the Spanish conquistadors arrived, with guns, steel blades, and war dogs to subjugate the remaining population. Avendano had seen Mayan people living relatively simple lives on the northern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, but what he encountered here was something different. These were the ruins of a city that rivaled the ancient capitals of the Old World in size, magnificence, and grandeur. Avendano couldn't have known it then, but he had stumbled across the ruins of the great Mayan capital of Tikal. For 7 centuries, Tikal had ruled a vast empire, conquered its enemies, and raised monuments of astonishing size and quality. Tikal wasn't alone. It was just one of at least 40 Mayan cities that have flourished in this region, giving birth to a thriving and colorful culture of arts and literature. Then, over 500 years before any European first set foot on the American continent, this complex society had collapsed. The great city of Tikal was abandoned along with every single other city in the area. After this catastrophe, the forest swept in to reclaim the stones of Tikal. Its imposing pyramids were left to crumble one by one into the earth. And the story of exactly what happened is still one of humanity's greatest mysteries. My name's Paul Cooper, and you're listening to the Fall of Civilizations podcast. Every episode, I look at a civilization of the past that rose to glory and then collapsed into the ashes of history. I want to ask, what did they have in common? What led to their fall? And what did it feel like to be a person alive at the time who witnessed the end of their world? In this episode, I want to look at that great romantic mystery, the fall of the classic Maya civilization. I want to show how this great civilization grew up among environmental conditions that no other society has ever contended with. I want to explore the fatal flaws that lay beneath the surface of this civilization and describe what happened after its final and cataclysmic collapse. Despite Avendano's encounter with the ruins of Tikal, the legacy of the Mayan civilization didn't really capture the world's attention until the early decades of the 19th century. This is down to the work of the American writer and explorer John Lloyd Stevens and his artist companion Catherwood. The pair had traveled together for 2 weeks through the deep Guatemalan interior, following rumors that the ruins of an ancient city lay somewhere in the jungle. They traveled in greater comfort than Avendano, but their journey was still difficult. They were beset by mosquitoes and the constant mud of the seasonal rains. But as they rounded a bend in the river, they came across a sight that Avendano would have recognized. It was the top of a towering pyramid just visible above the trees. We ascended by large stone steps, in some places perfect, and in others thrown down by trees. We ascended by large stone steps, in some places perfect, and in others thrown down by trees which had grown up between the crevices. We followed our guide through the thick forest among half-buried fragments to 14 monuments, one displaced from its pedestal by enormous roots, another locked in the close embrace of branches of trees and almost lifted out of the earth, another hurled to the ground and bound down by huge vines and creepers. The only sounds that disturbed the quiet of this buried city were the noise of the monkeys. Stevens and Catherwood would go on to explore over 40 sites around the Yucatan Peninsula, and the books Stevens wrote, illustrated with Catherwood's detailed lithographs, created a sensation around the world. Until then, it was thought that only Old World civilizations like Egypt or Babylon had built cities of such magnitude and elegance. People of the time simply refused to believe that such enormous constructions had been built by the people who now lived a relatively simple existence in Central America and called themselves the Maya. 19th century experts flocked the news, proclaiming that ancient Egyptians, Indians, Chinese, or Norse explorers must have crossed the ocean from the Old World and built these towering pyramids here in the forest. Some even suggested that they had been built by the mythical lost tribes of Israel, or even the inhabitants of Atlantis. But at the time, Stevens caused something of a stir. He was the person who had most extensively explored these ruined places, and he claimed that these cities were indeed the product of the Mayan people. Working our way through the thick woods, we came upon a square stone column about 14 feet high and 3 feet wide on each side, sculptured in bold relief. These were works of art proving that the people who once occupied the continent of America were not savages. Stevens insisted that these vast ancient cities had been built up over centuries by an advanced society indigenous to the New World. To him, these ruins told that story clearly enough. But of course, they also told another story. It was the story of a catastrophe that had few precedents in human history, the dramatic and wholesale collapse of an entire advanced society. In the romance of the world's history, nothing ever impressed me more forcibly than the spectacle of this once great and lovely city, overturned, desolate, and lost. Discovered by accident, overgrown with trees, it did not even have a name to distinguish it. Today, we do know the original Mayan names of some of these cities, and that's due to the tireless work of archaeologists who painstakingly decoded the Maya's written language. But before we dive into describing the collapse of the classic Maya civilization, I think it's worth pausing for a moment over how much of a miracle it is that any of this writing still survives. The Maya were a literate culture. They wrote on books made of bark paper or deerskin, using reed pens and conch shells as inkwells.